So welcome everybody to International Trade Week. My name is Emmanuel Gianquito and I will be chairing today's webinar. This is the first of a series of webinars that we have planned for you this week. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. We have a Q&A function at the top, and we would like you to use that Q&A function to submit any questions that you might have. We will not be monitoring the chat. I would remind you that this meeting is going to be this meeting is going to be recorded, and we're going to share the recording of this meeting with everybody on the call if you've agreed to be contacted. Likewise, the slide that we're going to use are going to be shared at the end. Let's get going. I will ask everybody to keep on mute and on camera off. I think that's automatic, we're just saying. And let's see who's on. So today's webinar is on FTA utilization, and we're going to be talking about the CPTPP and cumulation. We have a great panel and a lot of expertise in the room. We plan to be here for about an hour. Okay, so who are we? So I head consultancy at Chamber Customs. Chamber Customs is a company fully owned by the British Chamber of Commerce, and what we do, we bring expertise in the field of moving goods in and out of the country. We're part of the larger British Chamber of Commerce family, and we're presenting this webinar together with the Department for Business and Trade. So who do we have today? So you have me. I head consultancy and training at Chamber Customs, and I have the pleasure of dealing with a lot of businesses like yours who have challenges in moving goods in and out of the country and trading internationally. I'm also joined by Olivia Herford from the Utilisation lead, who's the Utilisation lead from DBT. And then my colleague William Bain, Head of Trade Policy at the BCC, and Paul Writing, who is our Documentation, Trade, Training and Compliance Manager. Very good. So let's start. We have various sessions. We are going to welcome your questions. At the end, we have a Q&A. We're not going to monitor the chat function, so please use the Q&A if you have questions. Today, we're going to be covering a little bit of the overview of what CPTPP is, and then we'll be talking about the concept of cumulation. We will bring practical examples throughout, trying to make it real and relevant to what you do. And then we'll move on to a little bit of the policy insight. So I always like to imagine that we're looking at how things are at the moment for businesses, but also we would like to have an insight on what's coming and how things are developing. And then we'll discuss how we can help, and we'll conclude with Q&A. So let me hand over to Olivia, if that's okay, for an initial introduction of FTAs and then CPTPP.
Fantastic. Thanks, Emmanuel. So yeah, like Emmanuel was saying, I am at the Department for Business and Trade, and I head up our team that focuses on utilising the CPTPP trade agreement, which I'll go into detail of in a second. But essentially what we do is sort of translating what the trade agreements the UK signed up to means in a sort of commercial aspect for the business community. So I just thought I'd do a little bit of a scene setting. What are trade agreements? Why do we sign them? What's the UK's sort of collection of trade agreements at the minute? Essentially, just agreement between two or more countries, sort of setting out the trading rules, trying to reduce restrictions, increase market access, essentially just trying to make trading that bit easier, that bit cheaper between the countries that are involved. There are many, many different provisions that can be included in an FTA. Also going to be focusing on the good side of things, and particularly rules of origin and accumulation provisions today. But yeah, just to say there's all sorts of things that can be included, but we'll just touch on a handful today. And it'd be great if we could just go to the next slide, please, Manuel. So just wanted to give you a quick overview of the landscape of the UK trade agreements at the minute. So as you can see in the top corner, we do have a lot of trade agreements. Since we left the EU, we've been able to sign trade agreements as an independent trading nation. But what we did do is roll over sort of provisions that when the UK had preferential trading terms as part of trade agreements when we were in the EU. So we call these rollover deals. But as you can see on the timeline there, over the last couple of years, we've been signing new trade agreements with some key partners there. So the one we'll focus on today is the CPTPP trade agreement, which entered into force in December last year. And as you can see at the bottom, we have ongoing negotiations with a number of countries. So looking to add to our collection of FTAs in the near future. But what actually is CPTPP, apart from being a horrible acronym? So it's a group of countries, which you can see there on the map, 12 different countries. Now the UK has joined, really diverse, but there are a number of really fast growing economies in there, particularly in that Southeast Asia region. There's a really dynamic consumer base that's growing. It's about over 500 million people in there at the minute. So, there are new and exciting markets that this FTA can help UK businesses break into or assist trade that you're already doing with those markets. It's seen as a real sort of gold standard, being modern and ambitious in terms of trade agreements. Just a quick note to say that Canada and Mexico at the minute haven't done what we call ratifying the UK's accession, just meaning that they haven't completed some domestic parliamentary processes to agree to the UK joining. So that just means that UK businesses can't actually use the CPTPP provisions with those two countries at the minute, but we do still have bilateral trade agreements with both of those countries. And just to say that the UK does have bilateral trade agreements with 9 of the 11 other markets in here. But that just gives businesses, an increased range of options when looking at your sort of preferential trading provisions with these countries. I know William's going to talk a bit later about where CPTPP is going as an agreement. It's expansionary. There are countries which are applying to join. And yeah, there are constant sort of reviews of the agreement built in to make sure it sort of keeps being that modern and ambitious high standard agreement. And then, just a couple of points to touch on how CPTPP supports trading goods. So I think tariffs is obviously one of the easiest and most tangible things to talk about under FTAs. See, it's been a big topic of conversation this year. Under CPTPP, over 99% of the tariffs on goods that the UK exports to CPTPP markets will be reduced. Most of these are sort of happen straight away when entry into force occurred last year, but some of them are sort of reduced over a couple of years. Rules of origin, again, we'll be talking about this a little bit more later, but what's a useful thing about the CPTPP trade agreement is there's one set of rules of origin to meet. If you're trading with a number of the CPTPP countries, this can be really handy. One set of paperwork, sort of that reduction in sort of admin time, cost, cumulation provisions. Again, Paul's going to cover those off in a couple of minutes. On the customs side, there's a real commitment to simplify customs procedures as far as possible, making that trade as frictionless as possible. So, for example, efficient release of goods, ideally within 48 hours if your paperwork's correct, options for express shipments, sort of advanced rulings on your customs duties that you'll get within 150 days. And once issued, these are valid for 3 years. So you just got that sort of increased confidence and certainty about what's going to happen at the border. And then there's just a general theme of digitization and digital trading within the CPTPP agreement, which we don't see necessarily in sort of many older trade agreements. So what does this mean? This is sort of really agreement to using electronic certification, the validity of e-signatures being just as valid as paper versions, which can be really helpful, particularly some of these markets are pretty far away. Again, just trying to, increase that efficiency of trade there and be as sort of modern as possible. If we can just pop onto the next slide. So just a quick note to say what DBT have been doing in this space to sort of create resources, materials to help you understand the range of provisions that are available. Because like I said, there's a whole lot of other things in there beyond the sort of the tariffs, rules of origin, etc. So we now have sort of all of our business support on a one sort of single point of entry website called business.gov.uk, and on there you'll find a range of guidance specifically for CPTPP, sort of breaking that down into the different policy areas that I was talking about, but also some sector focused information for the specific markets within the agreement. So if you visit any of the what we call sort of country market pages on business.gov.uk, you'll find under a heading how to utilise the FTAs. You'll be able to click on various different pieces of guidance that walk you through what does that mean for different businesses. Another really helpful tool I just thought I'd point out here is something called, well, we refer to it as CHEG, but basically you can type in your exact product, the HS code, and you can see the different tariffs available, not just under CPTPP, but any bilateral agreements that exist as well. And you can sort of compare what they look like. There are links to sort of what the rules of origin are to be able to sort of qualify for those preferential tariffs. And if you just explore business.gov.uk in general, there's a whole range of other information on there, webinars, general guidance, sort of links to contact DBT with any queries that you have throughout your journey. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks, Manuel.
Thank you very much, Olivia. There's always so much to say about these agreements, and what we would like to do is to continue the conversation and onto the more practical terms of understanding how does it work. So we talk about more than one country involved in this agreement, and so we have created a system so that we have the ability of having multiple partners in the trade, right? So we can have products that kind of evolve in the different countries, which brings us to the next concept, which can be quite complex, and is the concept of accumulation. So what happens to a product that is not just made fully in one country, but actually goes through various steps in different places? What is the final origin, and therefore what agreement can we use on the what trade agreement we can import or export those products? So I would like to go on to Paul, if that's okay, to look at some of this detail. So Paul, if I could come to you. What is cumulation? There you go. Just as if I had known that.
Who knew? Thank you, Emmanuel, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm Paul from the British Chamber of Commerce, and for my sins, I look after export documentation, which includes a lot around origin of goods, as the Chamber network issues all the non-preferential certificates of origin in the UK. So accumulation is linked to the rules of origin. So when we have a trade agreement, just because you're selling the goods from the UK to another country, we have a trade agreement, it doesn't mean that they will qualify to get the reduced tariff rates just because you're selling it from the UK, because they're being shipped from the UK. In order to qualify for the reduced tariff, then the goods have to count as UK origin. Now, obviously, with stuff which is called wholly obtained, so animals born and bred here, vegetables grown here, etc., it's fairly straightforward. However, when you've got a manufacturing process, it can get more complicated. And what accumulation is, it means that other countries' products can be used to qualify as UK origin to make it easier for your goods to qualify. So this allows us to expand our trading partners, use different suppliers, and yet still get the origin. So it combines the origin across participating countries. Next slide, please, Emmanuel. So accumulation in theory is really straightforward, as I just said. It means allowing another country's inputs into your product count as UK origin. So when you do that calculation, according to the trade agreement, you can say, oh, well, they're UK origin, and it makes it easier for the goods to qualify. However, where it gets complicated is the application of that sorry, it gets complicated when you're looking at the full bilateral, diagonal, regional, extended cumulation. It really is a bit more complicated. Today, we're just going to really talk about full cumulation because that's what applies in CPTPP. And what full cumulation means is that you can use the goods from any of the countries that have signed the agreement, and that counts as UK origin when you re-export the goods. So you can import stuff from Malaysia, put it into your product, and then when you export it to another CPTPP country, you can then, such as Vietnam, you can then say, well, that counts as UK origin, and you're more likely to meet the rules of origin and be able to claim that reduced preference. So why it matters? Well, accumulation encourages regional supply chains. It makes it much easier for businesses to meet their requirements. You can then look at your supply chains. You can say, okay, well, actually, if I buy my inputs from Vietnam rather than a country not in CPTP, that could save a lot of money when it comes to both tariffs on the import and tariffs when you export it finally. And of course, supports integration among partner countries. So it's helping us build trade relationships with all the countries within CPTPP. Next slide, please. Thank you. So how does that work in practice? Well, if we look at this outdoor clothing, the fabric is produced in Vietnam, the zips were made in Japan, and the water coating process is done in Malaysia. But all those parts are then brought to the UK and the final assembly is done in the UK. Now, if we weren't in CPTPP, then the chances of those goods qualifying as UK origin when we export them under the preferential trade agreement would be very low. But because we're allowed to accumulate and treat the fabric from Vietnam, the zips from Japan, and the water coating process done in Malaysia as UK origin, because we've accumulated the origin from Vietnamese to UK, we can then we can then claim preference when the goods are exported back to another CPTPP country, saving tariff. So it makes the trade agreement much more flexible for those involved. As has already been mentioned, Canada and Mexico have not yet signed into CPTPP. So you can't use cumulation at the moment with those countries until they sign. But as Olivia said, we do have bilateral agreements with those countries. Next slide, please. So what accumulation under CPTPP gives UK more sourcing applications, more flexibility, and more opportunities to trade competitively across a dynamic region, because these are really growing markets in a lot of cases. Thank you. Really just to say, I mean, as I said, communication can get really complicated, but the concept is really simple, and just take advice from your local chamber or whoever, and they will be able to guide you through whether your goods qualify or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That's very interesting. And yes, we have difficult acronyms today to get through. I still struggle. Now, it's very interesting. I just wanted to pick up on something that you said when you were talking about this scenario. Is we're likely to be able to claim UK origin when exporting to another CPTPP country within that partnership. And in the experience that we get at Chamber Customs and the clients that we help, often we find that there is confusion about that. There is confusion about the fact that a product could qualify for preferential origin under one agreement and not qualify for origin under a different agreement. So we have a quick question just for clarification on what is a bilateral agreement as opposed to what is a multi-country agreement. Does any of my lovely panelists want to quickly answer that just for clarity?
Well, as I'm talking, bilateral is between two countries. So UK, Canada have a bilateral trade agreement, and I was going to say, and cumulation in the UK Canada trade agreement is limited to just those two countries. Yeah, I think that's correct at the moment. Olivia might correct me. But a lot of the trade agreements that were rolled over from the UK had something called extended cumulation, which meant you could use EU products as well, as counting as UK. CPTPP is obviously a multi-country agreement, and that's why you can have full cumulation. So sometimes you just have agreements whereby you can cumulate between two countries, or sometimes all the countries within the trade agreement. That's why it seems more complicated than it really is. But basically, if you can either take advice or follow the guidance, which is really good these days on the gov.gov website, then you'll be able to work out whether your goods can qualify or not, and whether preference can be claimed.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And of course, there are some other questions. I mean, we'll do them at the end, but I mean, this is relevant to the point that you just raised. This, just for clarity, this is just an example to illustrate the concept of cumulation. There are other rules that have to be met in order to claim origin, and in the wonderful guidance that Olivia shared before, you will find the full rules of origin, which tend to be similar in concept across agreements, but the nuance is in each individual agreement, and you have to read and understand which rule you are meeting and under which rule you're claiming preferential origin. So somebody mentioned a certain percentage of the product. There is the concept of regional value content. There is the concept of change of tariff heading or change of tariff subheading. In order for you to accept the product as and claim preference, you have to be confident that you're meeting at least one of these rules. So we don't have one answer. Of course, you have to analyze what the product is like.
Yeah, and of course, there's various ways of proving the origin of the goods as well. But the one thing that you must do is have, whichever way you're going to evidence the origin of the goods, you must have that evidence in place when you do the import. You can't, there's something called importer's knowledge, which people think, oh, that's okay. I know the goods are of Vietnamese origin. I'll just import them and sort out the origin evidence later. You can't do that. So even though you may know that the goods qualify, at the time you make the customs declarations, you have to have the evidence to be able to support that. Otherwise, you'll lose the claim. This came up in a recent court case.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. So just in answer to those questions, it might be change of tariff heading. It might be regional value content. It depends. There isn't one answer that fits all.
I mean, if you've got change of tariff heading, for instance, then usually that doesn't, accumulation is not important at that point. You've done enough to process it in the UK to claim UK origin without having to worry about the origin of the different origin of the component parts. So change of tariff heading is great. You can use it parts from anywhere in the world if you qualify under that. But for a lot of things like clothing, where actually it's just different processes, the tariff heading doesn't change enough to grant origin. Therefore, you do need to worry about the component origin.
Yeah, perfect. That's great. I think that's very good clarification. I wanted to, before handing over to William, I wanted to put a case that we dealt with recently for one of our customers. So one of our customers deals in shellfish, and we were asked, the scenario is very simple. There's a company picks up Vietnamese, what we're talking about, Vietnamese prawns. The prawns are peeled, packaged, and frozen in Vietnam for sale in the UK. So the process is peeling, packaging, and freezing. When they come to the UK, we have three choices. At the time of check-in, on this commodity code, you have a 20% import duty rate, erga omnes, from all third countries. You have an 8% duty for CPTPP and a 5% rate of duty for Vietnam. So the question that our customer asked us is, what should I go for? Is there a reason why I should go for, I mean, clearly they would like to pay less, but is there a reason why, you know, we should go with one or the other? They were finding it confusing that the same product could be treated under more than one agreement. So I don't know if Olivia or Paul or William, if you have any advice or any insight on this topic.
I'm happy to kick off, and yeah, others can chip in. I mean, I think what we generally go as sort of at the first line of advice is that it really depends on your supply chain. You know, is cumulation going to be sort of beneficial for you, or actually, you know, sort of how's your supply chain set up? Where do you source your inputs from? Is actually sort of the administration of meeting the rules of origin under one agreement? Because I think, as we sort of touched on before, the tariffs might be slightly different under one agreement, but even if they're exactly the same, the rules of origin and your ability to meet those can vary. So sometimes you need to kind of look at your supply chain, look at your operations, look at where you process, and how easy one is to prove than the other. So I think that's something to consider, and that actually the admin of the lower tariff might be sort of a greater burden than actually paying that slightly higher tariff. So yeah, that's sort of general, a couple of things to consider. But Paul, I might want to add to that.
Well, actually, I think you're right to touch on that. I mean, utilization rates within trade agreements can sometimes be lower than you would think, because companies decide that it's actually cheaper just to pay the tariffs, especially if they're 2-3%, than it is to actually do the paperwork and provide the evidence. So with a lot of these decisions, when it comes to claiming preference, and sometimes using which import procedure you use, there may be a commercial drive that overrides what would be the logical use to claim the lowest preference. Sometimes it's quicker and easier just to pay the tariffs than it is to claim, but you need to make that an informed decision. So you need to work out what you would be saving by claiming preference and how much it's going to cost. You can't just go, oh, no, I won't worry about that this week, I'll worry about it next week. So make sure you make an informed decision. You know, if you decide not to claim preference, then may be completely justified, but make sure it's an informed decision, not just a trying to avoid doing a bit of work. And as I said, chambers are there to help you if that's what you need.
Yeah, and Paul, by converse almost, what happens if you import the goods without claiming preference, and then you realize that you could have claimed preference?
Oddly, you can backtrack and claim it. So although I said you needed the evidence when you claimed it, so that was it was a bit of a legal nicety. When the goods are imported into the UK, if you claim preference, you must have evidence at that point. If you import the goods, pay the tariff, but then later realise that you could have claimed preference, you can put a backdated claim in and get the duty back.
Great. I think it's clearly not the best approach. It's like doing the work twice, and of course, if this is your standard modus operandi, I think at some point somebody will ask questions. However, there is a mechanism there to do things compliantly and not claim preference when you don't have the evidence, but then if you realize that you could have put a retrospective claim, I think you have quite a generous amount of time to do that as well. Great. So I think what we're going to do is to have a look at policy and the insights. This is a complex agreement. CPTPP has been in the making for a while, and it continues to evolve. So I'd like to invite William, if you wouldn't mind, to give us a bit of an update on an insight. If just one moment, because my computer has decided that we don't want to move to the next slide, which is very annoying. There we are. So if we could come to you for a bit of a policy update, that would be great, William. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Emmanuel. And it's a pleasure to be here today and to take part in this important webinar. CPTPP is, a key market in one of the fastest growing parts of the world, both in terms of general economic growth, but also demand for imports. So the 12 countries which make up CPTPP constitute around 15% of global growth. If one looks at some of the members within the group of countries, those trends are going to increase only further. Just to put in context, if we look at trade data from earlier this year, the UK's goods exports to the EU are 185 billion, to the US 59 billion, but to CPTPP combined, a not inconsiderable 31 billion in goods exports. And that is growing fast. And so now, as part of that agreement, the UK now also has a say in terms of how that agreement can expand in terms of new signatories and new members, and also how deep the trading terms can go as well. So right now, Costa Rica has been accepted as a formal candidate for consideration for accession as the 13th state. Other countries have put in applications as well, including China and Taiwan. Other countries still have expressed intentions to submit applications in the future, for example, Thailand. So it is possible that in 10 to 15 years' time, this agreement may expand even more. And really, I think, shape trading patterns and the rules of trade in this fast-growing Asia-Pacific region. And I think the geopolitical significance, as well as the trade significance for the UK of being in this, is now, and being able to shape its future, is now very important indeed. Now, as well as broadening its members, CPTPP also has a general review process that takes place every 5 years in terms of trying to deepen its trading terms. And both the BCC and government in the UK, I think, would have a shared ambition about seeking to deepen those trading terms over the coming months and years. And so we've submitted about 11 ideas where we think the agreement could be deepened even further to allow even more use of this agreement to be made. And this also reflects the fact that, over the last few years, there's been increasing focus on areas like supply chains, the concept of friendshoring some supply chain activity in order to avoid dependence on one or two states and give yourself more flexibility and diversity in terms of where you source critical minerals or rare earths or other key parts of manufacturing supply chains. So in that context, we have the following 11 ideas that we've discussed with DBT, we've discussed with our CPTPP partners here in the UK. And we think that the main focus should be to include a new chapter into the agreement on critical minerals and supply chains. So within the block of 12, hopefully 13, if Costa Rica successfully exceeds, to make sure that we have the most modern, up-to-date, and also economically useful provisions around supply of critical minerals within the block, and also assisting in terms of supply chains in other commodities and intermediate products. Remember, in the UK, in terms of goods that we export, 75% of them start with an import. 75% of what we export is made up of imported commodities or imported intermediate products that we make into finished goods here in the UK. So particularly in the UK, having strong and flexible supply chain provisions is absolutely essential for our manufacturing base and our goods exporting base. We also believe that there could be stronger provisions within CPTPP in terms of sustainability, but also market access for green energy sources. This is an area where the UK is particularly strong, both in our provision of green hydrogen, but also in terms of wind turbines and other climate-friendly technologies. So again, An upgraded set of terms in the agreement that facilitates greater market access for these goods would be something that was very much in the UK export interest. Thirdly, improving customs processes. This is an important issue across the board, but within the CPTPP group, one idea in particular, which would improve the experience of traders exporting and importing across the 12 countries in the bloc, would be reviewing our customs rules, but also considering mutual recognition of authorised economic operator schemes between the parties, making trade quicker, simpler and cheaper. Our next set of recommendations. We also believe strongly that the 12 should make progress on technical barriers to trade. I mean, these can be often some of the most annoying and burdensome rules for companies to have to comply with when they're seeking to access an overseas market. So we would advise looking at things like permitting e-labelling, looking at things like mutual recognition of professional qualifications, reaffirming non-discrimination for like products provisions would all be things that would help boost the economic potential of CPTPP membership even further. We also want to see improvements on the services chapter within the agreement. Professional and business advisory services are boom areas for UK services exports right now. And in this International Trade Week, we'll be celebrating the fact that our services exports are more than double what they were 10 years ago. We're on track for £1 trillion of services exports from the UK within the next 10 years. That's an exciting prospect. But this agreement could be upgraded further to make sure that professional and business advisory services find it even easier to be sold across this bloc. So providing more access in terms of legal services would be important within the agreement and would help boost that vital sector of our economy and our export economy here in the UK. We also believe that we should have references within the agreement to best practice among CPTPP states. So consideration should be given to having an MFN type clause in the agreement, which would raise the bar, raise standards, improve market access, reflecting commitments made by parties at the WTO, for example, very recently in the Domestic Regulation in Services Agreement. So again, that would raise the quality of the agreement, permit more market access, particularly among services, and would be a real step forward in terms of how the agreement works. And then our last set of recommendations for this review. Again, looking at mobility issues, we know that most services are provided, via mode 1. So that's electronic transmission or sending products by email. But there are areas, particularly when firms are looking to win new orders and get new business, where issues around temporary entry of professionals is very important. So we hope that this review, when it's concluded by the end of this year and when the officials in the Secretariat come forward with recommendations to deepen the agreement, will also look at this issue and make rules on intra-company transfers much less onerous. That would be very helpful, again, in terms of services trade. We also hope the Secretariat will come forward with proposals to refit the e-commerce chapter. We know that this is one of the huge frontiers in terms of goods trade internationally right now. There's an e-commerce agreement which has been put on the table for adoption in Geneva through the World Trade Organization, a plurilateral agreement. And CPTPP should reflect the growing importance of having the best e-commerce provisions in terms of this review as well. So we hope that we can have changes to the text that will reflect world-leading Examples such as the UK-Singapore Digital Economy Agreement, very much the gold standard around digital trade and customs facilitation measures. And also the settled text that we referred to, that many CPTPP members have agreed to at Geneva in terms of the agreement on electronic commerce. So making that the exemplar of what the CPTPP chapter on e-commerce would be, would again help us do more trade in goods and make more sales. We should also continue to oppose data localization measures, which restrict the flow of data, bring in requirements for companies in terms of where they have to store data in particular servers in particular countries. We see that these measures have no justification, and the agreement should be a beacon to stand up for the free flow of data. We also believe that there should be improved protection of geographic indicators in the intellectual property chapter of the agreement, which would also help key industries here in the UK. And finally, we hope that the review process will lead to a refreshing and deepening of the provisions on climate change obligations as well, recognising that, again, one of the frontiers in international trade are agreements which benefit and scale up investment and open up market access for climate change technologies, seizing the opportunities, but also reflecting a common agenda for countries in terms of decent and sustainable climate change standards as well. So those are our priorities, 11 strong, and back to you, Emmanuel, for the Q&A.
Thank you very much, William. That's it's very interesting. It's interesting to see how there we are. There is a lot more. This is an evolving thing. It's an agreement that is evolving and is going well beyond what might be the practical understanding that a business might have. Is like, okay, well, do I get a cheaper tariff on my goods in that country? You just shown us like it goes beyond that. Now, just one of the questions that came through, and I invite everybody to use the Q&A. We're not monitoring the chat function, so please, if you could use the Q&A, would be a lot easier. One of the questions that came through is whether the CPTPP agreement applies to all products and all chapters, or whether there are restrictions and exclusions to what products can be considered in the agreement. So I don't know if who would like to offer some clarity on that point.
Is that just sort of check my understanding? I'm sort of reading that as if there is a sort of preferential tariff for all sort of products in all different chapters. That's sort of how I'm reading it.
Yeah,
so
my understanding is it like CBAM where only certain products can qualify under the agreement, or can we apply the agreement on any of the chapters in terms of like reduced tariff rates on importing the products?
Yeah, so there will be a set preferential tariff for sort of every product in every chapter. Exactly what they are does vary. So lots of them will be 0% under CPTPP. Some of them might be 5%. But I think so. I talked about the check your sort of tariffs tool earlier. You'll be able to type in your sort of exact product code into there. So your 10-digit HS code to see exactly what's available under CPTPP and under any other agreements. But yes, there is a set rate. It does vary sort of between products. Not everything is 0%. And some of them are being sort of reduced gradually over a number of years. So it sort of might have started at MFN rate, sort of 30%. It's coming down to 12%, 8%, and in a couple of years' time, it will be 0%. So they can be sort of changing gradually, particularly if they started out at quite a high level. But yeah, there is a sort of specific tariff allocated to each product, but sometimes you just need to go and search for your exact one.
And I think, Olivia, thank you. I think that's in our experience, what the way we approach it, we're normally guarded in offering one answer that fits all, because that's not the case. And thankfully, the UK tariff is very detailed, and it contains all of the information. So what you just said, you have to go and look up that particular code, I think, is the answer, which then links to the importance on having the right classification for your products, which very often is overlooked, because having the right classification allows you to then access the right measures and understand what preferential agreements you can use and what rules apply. So it's all connected. But we have a very detailed, very comprehensive tariff website that allows it, and it would show for the specific product what is applicable. Paul, you were nodding. Did you want to add anything to that?
Well, a couple of things. Yeah, I was going to say, if you don't classify your goods right, you're not going to look up the right rules. So everything starts with classification. And that's not just origin, that's to do with customs in general. All the rules about importing or exporting your goods will be linked to the classification of the goods. So really, it's really important to check the classification of your goods. The rules do change from time to time. Generally not majorly, but they can be updated almost at any point, or certainly when you're looking at sanctions around the world, etc. So make sure you check your classification, and that the rules that you think applied 5 years ago when you last looked at classification still apply, because they may have changed. A couple of questions. I did mention you can claim retrospectively. It's generally about 3 years you can go back and claim, but again, you do need to check in the specific trade agreement to see if there's nothing in there that says 2 years, or some of the agreements used to be as little as 6 months, but generally now it's about 3 years. And actually, another question we had is, does the majority of the processing have to be done in the UK to qualify as UK origin? And the answer is no. If it was done majority of the processing was done in Vietnam, and we're talking about claiming preference under CPTPP, then that would count as UK origin. That's the point of cumulation. So when you sold their goods, they would still count as UK origin, even though the majority of the product and even the majority of the processing was actually done in another country. You do have to do some processing in this country beyond the minimal operation to claim cumulation, but it's not a barrier just because the majority of the work was done in another country.
Yeah, that's really nice. I mean, and when you go and dive deep into the wording, it's interesting, because the agreement suggests that you can treat any product from any of the countries in the agreement as originating, so it doesn't really matter. So I think it's a good question. Thank you for clarifying that. One of the questions we received was like, what kind of inspection rates? And I'd be interested to get a little bit of clarity on who is policing these, and what should businesses prepare for. We've been talking about having the right evidence in place and making sure that we're doing things compliantly. I'm sure that everybody on the call and wants to be compliant, but what can we expect in terms of checks?
I don't know if anybody else wants to chip in. It seems to be mainly me at the moment. Well, it's really when the goods cross the border is where you're likely to get asked questions, both as an import and export. On export, unlikely that they're not going to ask you to prove the origin of the goods when you export it, because there's no tariff implications. But so when the goods are either imported into the UK or when they're imported into another country and you're claiming preference there, then that's when you're likely to be asked, and that's where you'll be asked to produce the evidence if required. It can be backdated, so what will sometimes happen is that the UK customs will receive a request from, say, Malaysian customs asking to check that the origin claim was done, origin was declared correctly. So then UK customs would contact you and check that.
Yeah.
Now we have this. Yeah. Sorry, we have this interesting situation where it is the exporter that makes the declaration, but it is the importer that is liable. So you do have to be careful about that and make sure that you can't just trust your exporter to say it. You need to have done some due diligence as well.
And I think that is exactly what I wanted to add is the person who holds, if we use the US term, the importer of record liability, that will bear the burden of proof. And so, you have to be prepared to understand. You have to do your due diligence. You can't just accept it face value. You have to understand your supply chain. We had another couple of questions. William, one of the question is about China, which is a growing market, and are there any plans to support UK imports from China for technology or machinery?
Really good question. As we said, I mean, China is part of a really significant other trade agreement in the region, the RCEP agreement. It has submitted an application to join CPTPP. Now, bear in mind that it's up to any individual state to veto a new applicant, and just that you have put in an application doesn't mean you go through a formal accession process. So there may be a very long waiting room before China is considered. I think in terms of our bilateral links, of course, the new legislation in terms of sanctions and on investment screening is very important, that the UK has adopted in the last few years and is implementing, because there is the balance. Obviously, there must be respect for the norms and laws of our country in terms of how we handle data, ensuring that data is not falling back into the hands of state actors where that is not permitted or authorized by our laws. So it's a very important issue, this matter now of investment screening. And it's why not just the UK, but the EU, you will see in the US as well, why there are processes now which are really essential to meet that balance. Of course, we want to see investment from China where it's on the right terms. Of course, China is a key trading partner, our third largest trading partner outside the US and EU in terms of trading goods. But we have to be mindful about the different systems there, and also that they comply with our laws when it comes to goods and investment coming into the UK, and particularly on the management of data as well.
Yeah, thanks. That's an interesting, more development coming up. So there are there was a generic question I'd like to take, which is, how do you recommend classifying your products? There are various ways of doing it. You have to understand how the tariff works, and you have to do work in-house. There is support available, and your chamber can help you, and we can help you, Chamber Customs. You also have support from HMRC, and they offer non-binding and binding advice on classification. So it depends how much support versus how much ratification you need. There is support available, and we recommend learning how to do it. You can bring in consultants to do it for you. That's also a valid approach. We believe in sharing that knowledge and transferring that knowledge so that you retain that ability in-house, because as Paul was saying before, things change, and you can't just classify a product once. You have to keep on top of things. And in answer to the prawns, because somebody got interested in our prawns example, Paul, and any of the agreements could be applied. You're always welcome to pay the full rate of duty. There is absolutely no, from a compliance point of view, from a HMRC revenue collection point of view, there is no problem. But if you want to apply a reduced tariff, you have to be happy that you can meet those rules as Olivia was explaining before. I think there was one more question for you, William. Do you have any timeframes, or maybe for Olivia, any timeframes regarding Canada and Mexico signing UK into the CPTPP?
Yeah, I can pick this one up. So we don't have any sort of exact timeframes at the minute. We are, as a government, sort of continually engaging with our counterparts in both Canada and Mexico. Canada, they have started the process of putting sort of bills, legislation that they need to through their parliament at the minute. So that is looking like it's making good progress. It has to sit in parliament for, X number of days. So we're kind of hopeful that and sort of perhaps springtime next year. But what I will say, after they've completed their ratification process, this basically triggers a 60-day countdown window, essentially, to when the agreement will then enter into force. So as soon as we know that they've completed their ratification process, we'll be able to give an exact date of sort of 2 months later. The UK will be able to use the provisions with that country. With Mexico, it's a little bit more unclear, but we are constantly engaging at sort of the highest sort of like government level to put the UK case forward and encourage them to ratify.
Yeah, thank you, Olivia. And what you said before, I thought was very important, is like in both cases, we have bilateral agreements in place that can be used. So it's not perfect, but at least, there is a way for trade to continue. So I'm very conscious of time, and I'm keen to keep to our time. So our closing remarks is that, well, first of all, thank you very much to Olivia, Paul, and William, and to all of you for attending this webinar. I think we learned some interesting information. I think for me, the key takeaway is this agreement is there and it's worth for businesses to study and to see whether they can take advantage of this to reduce their cost of trading and increase their competitiveness and to simplify their supply chains. I understand it's not finished, but hopefully the wonderful suggestions that William put together as part of the BCC policy work, which is, of course, is the summary and the distillation of all what our businesses in the network contribute. I think it would be it's interesting to see how we translate what businesses need into policy suggestions that we made to the government, and we work closely with the government. I think that's a positive way of moving forward. In terms of where you can find advice, businesses can find advice with the local chamber. They can use our consultancy services, and there is loads of advice available from government and the various agencies, as Olivia very nicely explained before. So we would like to remind you that as part of as this wonderful week, International Trade Week 2025, we are offering a series of free webinars. The next one in the series is on the 4th of November at 11 o'clock, and we're going to be talking about customs compliance to cover what customs audits really look like. Since some people are asking for what happens in an inspection, well, sometimes you go through an audit, and we would like to tell you what happened, because we've been there and we've accompanied many customers in that journey. So I think that's all for me. I would like to say thank you very much for attending. You will get a copy of the slides and the recording very soon, and we hope to see you at the next webinar. Thank you very much.